Welcome into another edition of the Front Office. I'm Tony Lombardi here with our resident capologist, Brian McFarland. Brian, welcome in.
Thanks for having me again, Tony.
Always a pleasure, brother. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
So the Ravens, they're busy.
Yeah.
They keep making moves, and Eric DeCosta has been burning up the phones and just doing whatever he can to augment the roster in a way that gets the Ravens the best 53 men on the field or on the sidelines at one time. But there's just a real quick recap of the game on Monday night. I got to tell you, I was a little bit surprised by the way the Ravens came out. They looked a little flat to me at times, particularly after they got that lead. And defensively, I don't know what was going on with some of those calls. They just, all out blitzes and leaving their guys on the back end exposed. And then the offensive line, more problems. And these are two things, Brian, that we thought going into the season that the Ravens had brought a little bit more oomph in the pass rush and that they've solved some of the problems across the offensive front. Now, I know the offensive line hasn't had much of a chance to play together in this off season and during training camp because of injuries and whatnot. But wow, this wasn't what I expected on Monday night.
No, me neither. Obviously, when they jumped out 14-0, that felt pretty good. And then everything came to a grinding halt. As you mentioned, they were actually covering Waller pretty well early, even with a lot of blitzing. But then it seemed like that kind of fell apart, whether Oakland did something to adjust and the Ravens didn't, do a counter adjustment. I'm not sure. And then at some point, they went from a lot of blitzing just to rushing 4, and they weren't anywhere near him. And then obviously not the last drive, but the last drive of regulation, when they had 2 plays to get in the field goal range, they rushed 3. And I don't know if you saw the video. One of the offensive linemen, I think it was Jeff Schwartz, posted it, and he was like, I don't know what they're doing here, because two defensive backs came up, and they were going to get a tight end or a running back coming out of the backfield, but Oakland held 7, and they just stood there. Even if there's a little flip pass, you've got 7 defenders behind that can come up and make a tackle, and right. Those guys were just basically doing nothing. Now, maybe it was miscommunication. I'm not sure what was going on there, but you go to prevent and you see what happened. They rushed 3 and got nowhere near him, and he threw strikes down the field. So yeah, it's concerning. I'm not sure. The offensive line is, to me, obviously the most concerning, because Lamar got hit a lot and had to throw the ball away a lot. Had to try to get out, and obviously he's great when he gets out and gets moving, but you got to get him out of the pocket first or let him out. And they did a pretty good job at both of those ends. And I know Stanley's coming back from injury, and as you said, the offensive line hasn't had a lot of time together. So we just have to keep our fingers crossed that they'll get better, because there's really not a lot they're going to be able to do roster-wise from here on out.
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating, but and then they lose another offensive lineman, Tyree Phillips, a guy who looks like he finally found a home at left guard. And I think that those signs were there during training camp. He looked pretty good when given the opportunity to stick to one position, but also gives the offensive line a little flexibility if in a pinch they needed him to play a tackle position. Not that he's an ideal tackle, but in a pinch, not a bad option or a fallback solution. But he's now gone, it looks like, for the season. I don't know that there's been an announcement made yet by the team, but all indications are he's out for the year. The Ravens are again back in business to try to find another offensive lineman. And given the way that Alejandro Villanueva played against the Las Vegas Raiders, Brian, you got to think that a swing tackle might be on Eric DeCosta's list, but he's running out of money. So they restructure Marlon Humphrey. Talk a little bit about that and what that affords the Ravens moving forward in 2021.
Yeah, so that gave them about 1.8 in cap savings. At that point, they had about 4.4 in cap space, but that was before they elevated, or I should say, signed to the 53, Ellis and LeVeon. Mm-hmm. So that probably, now Cannon was still in that 4.4, so he would come off And so they're probably down to, 3.5. It's and what the thing is, they're replacing, and they still got 2 roster spots to go.
Right.
So even a rookie minimum, that's almost 1.3 right there if you sign 2 more guys. And I mean, they went into last week with only 51 of the 53 filled. I wouldn't be surprised, since you can bring up 2 guys from the practice squad, and since you got to sit guys anyway. I would not be surprised if they did not fill those spots until they have to, until they're carrying guys who are too beat up to play this week, but they don't want to put them on IR. So it would not surprise me. And I was wondering, I've never seen it done except the last game of the year, something like that. Why sign a guy for the last week, and why does a guy want to sign for the last week? I'd rather be a free agent next year. But I don't think there's anything in the CBA that says they can't, though there probably should be. But I don't know if anybody's dreamed of this scenario, but they basically, Peters is the only place they can get basically more than $1 million out of in a restructure. They can get about 2, I think, on him as well. And they already restructured. They didn't do the max restructure, so they could do it again. And there's a reason they didn't do a max restructure back in March. They didn't want to. So obviously, but now it's necessity perhaps. And then the other guys you got to add void years to, and they've clearly did not wanted to do that. So it's going to be interesting how they bring somebody else in from the outside. Unless it's for the minimum, I don't see how they can do it.
Brian, with Peters, you're saying he's the one guy they can get another $1 million or so out of. What would be your thought if they actually extend him? Because he's been on record saying how, speaking glowingly about playing for the Baltimore Ravens. Doesn't sound like he wants to go anywhere else. He's got what, 1 more year left on his contract?
1 more year. They could extend his salary's about 4.5. So if you drop that down to $1 million for the minimum, which it has to drop to, so it gives you about 3.5 to work with. $10 million bonus over 5 years, then that counts 2 this year. So you're creating about $1.5 million in that scenario. Actually restructuring him, you can create more.
Okay.
I know that's one of those you wouldn't expect,
Right.
but structuring. So my guess is, especially with him being injured now, if they can get him to, I think the deal he signed the first year, he took a small bonus, but it was late in the year. Because I think he signed on I think it was the last week of the season, if I remember correctly, re-signed. And I think he only got like a $5 million bonus. And of course, by March or February, he was getting a bigger bonus. So maybe you can get him to take $5 million and then, give him a $10 million bonus in March, kind of, that split bonus thing that they've been doing. And maybe since it's not, 6 to 8 months from now, it's not that far into the future. He might be willing to do that. And that would create a little more. So, it's possible, but he's also injured. The last deal he signed, I don't know if this was the Ravens or him, but it was only a 4-year deal. And it seemed to coincide with the time that they would be paying. Lamar's big money would be kicking in. I don't know if that was their thought or his thought. His thought, I want another big payday when I'm still young. So, there's a lot of variables there. But it's not going to, an extension, if it does create anything more than a restructure, won't be by a lot.
Now, I've had some questions today on direct messages on Twitter and emails about what is the cap hit if the Ravens part ways with Alejandro Villanueva. Now, I know it's just 1 game, and that's just not the Ravens style to have a knee jerk like that, particularly when they gave him $8 million in guaranteed money.
Yeah, there's no way. They're not that impatient to start with,
right?
But even if this is 4 weeks from now and it's the same, my guess is he goes to the bench, because his entire salary this year is guaranteed 2 ways. One, it was guaranteed by his contract. And now, because he was on the roster for week 1, it's essentially guaranteed by termination pay. So that's not happening. There's no cap savings to releasing him and finding a replacement. So, there's no sense in releasing him at all. Benching him perhaps, but that's a different story.
When I watched him out there at practice during training camp, because he didn't get really a lot of reps in preseason, but when I watched him in training camp, he was getting beaten pretty regularly. And I thought, well, okay, he's adjusting to playing right tackle. He's been a left tackle his whole career. And I've never played either position, so I don't know what that transition is like. I've heard some people say it's like if you're a right-handed hitter, now you're a left-handed hitter. I don't know if it's that drastic, but who am I to refute that? But at the same time, it's just there was never any sign or any indication during camp that there was some growth there. And you have to wonder, they play this guy twice a year. They have to know who he is. I'm a little bit surprised by, maybe Max Crosby's that great. I don't know, but I'm a little surprised by the outcome of that game and his performance in it.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers didn't want him back. He did not have a very good year last year. And often that's the time the left tackle moves to the right tackle, because it's different. And obviously once you get through the adjustment, you generally, even though you got your Max Crosby's of the world out there, it's generally I shouldn't say easier, because it's not easy, but it's the obviously less critical of the two. But it does take some adjustment, and he didn't get a lot of it in training camp, so he didn't get a lot of reps there. Yeah, I mean, let's just hope it's going to take Ian Stanley. Maybe it takes September to knock the rust off, and you just hope they can, go 500 this month. And then I don't remember who the next two games are after Kansas City, but if they can do that, just, and then by then, maybe in October, they're much more ready to go.
Yeah, it's Detroit in game 3, and then it's Denver in Denver game 4. So yeah, it's right now. You almost are writing it down, and at least in pencil, that they're 0-2 right now, because Kansas City is going to be a tough beat.
Yeah,
particularly after watching the way the Ravens played defense against Derek Carr. They made Derek Carr almost look like Patrick Mahomes on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, Carr, he had I was impressed with him. And again, whether that was the Ravens not playing very well, but he did a lot. I mean, he threw off his back foot a lot while drifting back, and he was dropping the ball right in. I mean, he was dropping it right in. So, I was, the knock on him supposedly wasn't he doesn't push the ball down the field. Well, he certainly was doing that. It seemed like once he got away from throwing to Waller every play like he was early in the first half, then once he seemed to get away from that and start spreading the ball around and maybe trusting his other receivers, I don't know what you want to call it, but he really seemed to take off.
Right. But back to the offensive line for a second, because even though Wink seemed to be outcoached on Monday night, I have a feeling that side of the ball will get their act together a little bit faster than this offensive line is going to get together. So people want to know, what options do the Ravens have to replace AV now? Because like you said, they're not going to cut him loose, but there's not many options out there that look good. One, you mentioned that they're about $3.5 million in cap space now. You restructure or play a little, mix and match with signing bonus and whatnot with Marcus Peters. Maybe you get another $1 million. So if you got $4.5 million in cap space, which they want to keep some of that for emergency funds, how do you find anybody on the street that's, let's say, willing to take $2.5 million? Because I know the name of Mitchell Schwartz keeps coming up,
right,
but he's a guy that's slow to recover from a back injury.
Right. I mean, even his brother Jeff Schwartz, who I was mentioning earlier, was on Twitter. Is like, I know a guy who's uglier than me.
Yeah, that was funny.
Or something. Yeah, it was something who the Ravens should be calling, but who's also way better than me as an offensive lineman, who the Ravens should be calling. So, but I did look. There was an article just last week that he was on Mitchell Schwartz was on a podcast, and he clearly indicated he wasn't ready yet. He didn't give a time frame, but he said he still considers himself an NFL player, meaning he still wants to play when he can. So, but I mean, my guess is he's going to have options. And maybe with a team that has more cap space that can make it more, interesting for him for sure. And obviously, if that is the end of this month, let's just say if the Ravens are 1-3, or 2-2, hopefully at worst, are we an attractive option compared to, if Kansas City wants him back, we'll go to Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an opportunity. He's going to need a place to start, because if he's got to prove he's healthy, he's not going to want to go anywhere to be a swing tackle. Obviously becomes here. I don't think that's going to be an issue, at least based on one game. But he made $5 million in cash last year. He had an extension. The average of the extension was 11 mil. Now he's not going to be able to ask for either of those. But maybe the Ravens can. He didn't play in a lot of games last year, so depending upon what happens, but every year before they played all 16. So they could use some incentives that wouldn't hit the cap this year. And if I think he only played 6 games last year. So if he's here for 7, they add another $1 million. If he's here for 9, you can add another. So you can add those. Now they're already eating in the next year's cap with all the moves they're making. So they have to be mindful of that. And that kind of brings me back to that. I wonder how many weeks they might just carry 51 or 52, just because the more restructures they do, and they're truly running out of places. I mean, and over the off season, I had that. I think you saw it was on the site, and I put it on Twitter a lot. The effective cap space, and I was putting $5 million aside for their injuries. Well, right now they have 20 million, almost 23 million on IR. And even if you replace all those guys, because those numbers stay on the cap, if you replace those 14 players with a guy just at the minimum, you're looking at close to 10 million. So, they've already burned through their excess twice, so to speak. And and we're only game 1, so they got to be mindful of that, or they're going to have to play with 49 or something like that at some point if people keep getting hurt.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, and maybe what they'll have to do because of the financial constraints is to scheme things a little bit differently. Maybe they use tight ends a little bit more to give some chipping action on the edge where AV is, or maybe they have a moving pocket or rolling pocket that allows them to get outside or away from that pressure that's coming from that weak spot. And then maybe they bridge to a point where Juwan James could be available to them in November, if he recovers from the Achilles injury. Talk about that a little bit, Brian.
Sure. So he's on NFI, which is the non-football injury list, because he was injured working away from the facility. So now this is interesting. So they did not have to pay him any salary. NFI, you don't have to. What they gave in the first reports were that he was getting a $500,000 bonus, and that then he was going to be on NFI, and he wasn't going to have a salary. Well, right now, the NFLPA is showing a salary at $660,000, which is technically the rookie minimum. Now he's not a rookie, but again, the Ravens can pay him $10. They could pay him $10 million while he's on NFI. But I thought that was interesting. Now the NFLPA's bookkeeping online stuff is not always the greatest, so maybe that's an error. That's calculated into that 4.4 they have right now. But I thought that was interesting. That once they put him on NFI, I was expecting that to go down to 0. So I don't know. Maybe they liked what they saw of him health-wise, and that was the carrot to say, we want to keep you motivated. But right now, and I don't. Unfortunately, there's really no way to know if that's accurate or not. But if he's healthy, they've already paid him. They'll have already paid him for the time he gets back. And the plan seemed to be he'd sit out this year, and then they'd have an option to bring him back next year because he's under contract. So we'll see. But that's an interesting. When I picked that up, I was like, that was not without, because my numbers were up by $660,000, and I'm trying to figure out where it was, and then I finally figured out that's where it was. It wasn't looking there in the first place.
Well, Eric has told me, Eric DeCosta said to me before that Brian does a great job being you, and that it's really hard to be any more accurate if you don't work in this building. So that's a credit to you. So we appreciate your work there.
Rock Spring Financial Group is the premier local Maryland mortgage brokerage firm. They are known for the hometown feel with a customer experience level that is unrivaled. They specialize in all home loan types, whether it's conventional, FHA, VA, and debt consolidation. Rock Spring covers it all. So when you're tired of issues with online mortgage shopping and want the human touch, look no further than Rock Spring Financial Group, LLC. Give Rick Metzger a call or visit them at rockspringfinancial.com.
Now, a lot of moving parts in the Ravens backfield, offensive backfield, and we got a first chance look at Tyson Williams as a starting guy on Monday night, and then his replacement or his substitute to give him some reps in the second half, Latavius Murray. Now, those guys have, they're on the 53-man, and you've got LeVeon Bell and Devante Freeman, who are part of the practice squad. If those guys were to be elevated, Brian, what are the changes in their cap figures, and what kind of drain on that $3.5 million that's available now does that take away?
Right. So, I mean, obviously, if they're just elevated from the practice squad as one of those two elevations, they're both going to cost about $55,000 per game, at least for those two games that they could be called up freebies, so to speak.
And now they're 14, correct?
Well, I'm sorry.
And now they're 14,000 each, right?
Well, they're 14. Yeah. So it'll be, so they get paid what would be the applicable, a 1/18th of the applicable minimum for them, which will come out to be 55,000. So the 14 goes away. So it's a difference of 41 grand. So I don't, that's why I wonder if they'll bring either of them up. Well, they need to bring one up probably since they released the guy,
Cannon.
Cannon. He was here for such a short time. I forgot his name already. So, and Freeman's probably the one because he had a whole training camp. Bell has not, and that gives Bell a little more time. But this week they could, since they've already brought up Ellis and LeVeon like they did last week, and now they're on the 53, maybe they bring those two up or one, at least Freeman up off the practice squad and saving some cap space and, using that to their advantage. But once they bring them up, depending upon what week, it's however many games left, 10/18ths of the minimum salary for that player. So you're looking at, 800 grand, 700 grand, probably, depending upon when they call them up, maybe 6 if it's later in the season. So, every little thing chinks into that armor of that cap space, which was very little, but it's just, unfortunately, the rash of injuries has just crushed their cap.
One of my knee-jerk responses to a move made today, which you corrected me on, had to do with Trenton Cannon. You mentioned him. I kind of liked what I saw from him as a special teams player. He's a really speedy guy, and he had a nice little run on a power sweep that was called back for holding against Eric Tomlinson. By the way, a replay that we never saw if he actually held or not.
They were terrible replays.
Yeah, the replays were awful on Monday night. So we didn't get to see that, but he showed a burst out of the backfield. I kind of like having that guy, but when the Ravens decided to cut or part ways with him today, talk about that strategy, because I thought, wow, he started with the team. Now they're on the hook for the rest of the season. And I don't understand the logic behind that move, but you corrected me. So tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Sure. So he only has 3 years of service time. So that means he's not a vested veteran. A vested veteran has to have 4 years or more. The vested veterans are the ones who are entitled to termination pay, which means basically their salary's guaranteed for the year. But because Cannon only has 3 years, they only had to pay him for the one game, which I think was $42,000 or something in that range. So the rest of his salary, and actually it doesn't matter. I don't know if you saw, but San Francisco claimed him on waivers.
Okay. So
even if the Ravens had been on the hook, well, if he was a vested veteran, he wouldn't have gone through waivers. So it wouldn't have mattered. And then he could double dip if you're a veteran. But in his case, he's not a veteran. So they just paid him for the one game, and that's that. But yeah, I agree. I was surprised. And I would assume they were trying to get him back on the practice squad and then elevate him twice and then figure out where their roster was at that point. But San Francisco screwed that up, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, that's a risk that I guess they thought they were willing to absorb or take, and I don't know. Again, it's one game, and it's like the first game. We always overreact one way or the other about the first game, but I just kind of like what I saw from him as a special teams guy.
Yeah, I mean, and they have two open roster spots,
right?
So I don't, maybe they don't want to carry 4 backs. Maybe they plan to bring Freeman up and they don't want to carry 4 backs, or maybe they, like I said, maybe they're just going to try to leave those spots open as long as they can. If they feel, well, we already know who our inactives are going to be next week anyway. So, let's rephrase that. We know who our 47 actives are going to be next week. So we don't need to add anybody at the end. Now, another guy gets hurt Thursday or Friday, and they may regret that, but that's what the call-ups are for.
Now, when you see players like a Trenton Cannon come on to the Ravens, and then you see how it all unravels after 1 week, and the gamesmanship played by Eric DeCosta, you would have to think that going in, he knows all these things. He knows that this guy is not a vested veteran, that I can keep him for 1 week and maybe we'll take a risk of sliding him onto the practice squad, and then maybe we don't get to keep him as they did not because San Francisco claimed him. But you got to kind of be a chess player and be 1 or 2 steps ahead of the rest of the league, and I think EDC does a good job of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can look at, a lot of teams do it, but I think he's done well with it. And I think, bringing in Des Bryant last year we were one of the first teams to bring in that guy for a quote-unquote veteran for a kind of a tryout. Everybody else was stocking their practice squad with younger guys and guys you were expecting to contribute immediately if you needed them. And when you have 16 guys on the practice squad, you got some free space there if you want. So we certainly did that. And I do think that, the thought was we'll bring Cannon in for a week. They may even told him, look, we're going to cut you next week, but we want you on the practice squad. And after your 2 freebies, so to speak, your free elevations, then we hope to bring you back, but it depends on where the roster is. Or we just keep you on the practice squad. And if somebody else signs you off of it, then, so be it. So, I think that's there. But yeah, New England, their place kicker right now is on their practice squad. They called him up, Nick Folk, veteran. They called him up last week. I'm sure they'll call him up this week, and then they'll figure it out from there. But that gives you that roster flexibility when you have guys. Obviously can't do it the whole year, but at least early in the season, or when you get a chance to get a guy on your practice squad who can help out for 2 games while you figure things out. It's great flexibility. Now there's 6 veterans on the practice squad right now because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Normally that's 2. And I do think in a couple years, the CBA is supposed to go up to 4, but right now it's only supposed to be 2. But the COVID amendments allowed, actually the practice squad is only supposed to be 12 too. So it's 16 and 6 now with the veterans. So that's much more helpful too. It'll be tougher on coaches next year if we can get out of this COVID. They won't have as much flexibility like they do now.
Real quickly before I let you go, the Ravens are listed as anywhere from 4 to 5 point home underdogs hosting the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. All eyes in America will be on M&T Bank Stadium. How do you think that game's going to play out?
Oof. I'd like to think they can keep it close. I feel like they might keep it close for a little while, and then Kansas City will hit the accelerator, and they'll get a couple scores, and that'll take all the air out of the team and the building. Gosh, I don't want to put numbers on. It's just, they've always been better when they've been counted out. Sometimes it seems like.
That's true. Yep.
But they're also, I feel like they're really wounded right now, and that's a different mentality than they usually have. Even Harbaugh with the injuries. I know it shows he's caring and cares about his players, but his reactions were a little different. I'm not blaming him in any way. I want to make that clear, but I just thought it was a different tenor than the past. There was less defiance about it, next man up, things like that. And I'm not saying, that's bleeded into the team or anything like that, but just there was something seemed off they didn't seem as physical. Maybe Oakland was beating them up, and that was, that you have those games. Hopefully that's the case. But yeah, I just feel like all of a sudden something's really off with this team.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, that it's a tough game for them to go into based upon what we saw against the Raiders in Las Vegas. And, I know there's this recency bias that's in play here, that we only have one game to go on, and they'll say that there are no moral victories in the NFL. But I have to think that if the Ravens can play these guys tough and show growth in the offensive line play, and maybe even getting after Mahomes with 4 and 5 guys instead of not getting home with sending 6 or 7 after Derek Carr, I think that is a moral victory, and it sets up well for the balance of the season. And who knows, if the Ravens are to have a successful season, eventually the road's going to go through Kansas City, and maybe there can be some lessons learned in this game. So I don't see the Ravens winning it, but I think that they're going to play competitively and hang in there till the end.
Yep, that sounds good. I'm fingers crossed. I hope so. Will you be there?
No, I will not be there. I'm actually heading to a wedding in Napa Valley, leaving tomorrow morning.
Nice.
And so I'm going to be out there all weekend. So I'll be watching it from some establishment in Napa, California. So at least I won't have to worry about it if it's going to be televised or not. We know it's a national game, so
right.
It'll
be 5:30, so that'll be kind of nice.
Right. I won't feel so bad when I have to write about the team, right?
Yeah, that's right. When all of us are leaving the stadium and stuck in traffic at midnight, it'll be just 9 o'clock for you.
Right.
So that'd be nice.
Well, enjoy the game, and thanks for joining us again here tonight, Brian.
Absolutely. Good talking to you.
Okay, folks, this is the Front Office, a Russell Street Report product, and we'll be back with you again next week. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then.